In this tutorial, I'm going to show you another spline modeling technique. This one is known as Bevel Profile. So if you're in my class, you have access to this provided Maxine. You'll want to download the zip file, unzip it, and copy it to the appropriate location and open it up. If you're not sure how to do that, please refer to the tutorial file, Working with Provided Zip Files. Okay, so what I'm going to do to start off is I have my reference, it's set up. I'm going to click here, the top view. I'm going to click and say maximize viewport. My goal here is I want to draw out the shape of the state of Texas. So I'm here in create. I'm going to go to splines and click on line. I'm just going to start right here at this corner. I'm going to go down, and I don't worry about getting the perfect shape. You see I'm being really sloppy. I just want to kind of get some points in there to kind of get the general shape, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to refine it. There we go. That's off to a good start. I'm going to go to modify now, and here in modify I'm going to expand where it says line. I'm going to go into vertex, and now I can start grabbing my points and moving them around. One thing I might want to do is just region select everything and then right click on any one of these guys and go up and make sure it says corner so that they're all corners now. Okay. And so I'm just going to adjust this. I don't want to be 100% accurate. I don't want to have all of these little nooks and crannies that are in here. The more of those little details that I put in there, the more trouble I risk running into when I turn this into a more detailed model. All right. You can start to use tools like your chamfer if you want. Click and drag on that, and that'll drag out the splines. Again, I'm going to right click, select all of them, right click and say corner to convert them all to corners as I go. You want to avoid anything like this. If you end up with a little divot point like this, it's going to be really bad. We're going to run into some explosions. And I'll show you what those look like a little bit later once we get into the profile part of this. Let's move these around. Oops. Just adjust them slightly. And so basically I'm just kind of going for the general shape of Texas here. Not looking to be 100% accurate. It looks like there's kind of like a little line out there already, kind of giving me a general guideline. Maybe I'll use my refine to drop an extra point in there. Alright, I think we're just about there. Let's maybe break this up just a little bit. Dropped in 3 points there. Okay, this kind of gives me the shape of Texas. I guess let's be a little stickler for detail and maybe add 2 points here to kind of refine this just a little bit. Alright. This is what we professionals like to say is good enough. So let's move on. I'm going to come here to go back to create, and now I'm going to restore my viewports. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a technique called the Bevel Profile, and what that's going to do is it's going to use this main outline for the main shape. But in order to come up with what the volume of it is, like the actual height up from the z-plane, so going up, it's going to reference another shape. And so to make that secondary shape, I'm going to come over here to the front, and here's that black line in the front that represents 0 on the x-axis. And so what I'm going to do is over here in the positive area of x, I'm going to make my shape. So let's go ahead and we'll maximize this viewport and just hit Z with Texas, our spline selected. There we go. And I'm going to click off of that. So that's my main shape. So what I'm going to do here now is I'm just going to make a little rectangle. This is about how tall I'm going to want my state, kind of my shape to be here. And then let's just make a circle. And drag that out. Right click to get out of there. And now I'm just going to select this rectangle, right click on it, and convert it to an edit spline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine two shapes together. So Here I have only the rectangle selected. It says rectangle. And now I'm going to find under geometry there's a button called attach. And if I move that in here and hover it over the circle, you can see my cursor changes, right? And it changes to a little lit circle, a selected circle, and a dark unselected one with an arrow that drives over to two selected ones, which means we've actually attached them together. So if I click on this, they're now attached. They're one object. So I'm going to right click to disable attach. So let's open up editable spline here. Here's our different components. I'm going to go into spline and I'm going to click on my rectangle. So what I want to find is an option under geometry called Boolean, right? And so if you haven't dragged it over, you'll have to really scroll down to find it. Now the way Boolean works is you subtract one shape from another, but both those shapes have to be part of the same spline. So I have one shape selected. I'm going to click Boolean and click on this shape, and now it's one spline. If I undo that and I do subtraction and turn on Boolean and click on it, now it cuts that out. If I undo that and go to intersection, turn on Boolean and click on it, there you go. It's just where those pieces intersected. So I'm going to use subtraction, click on it. So now I have this is the shape that I'm going to use. Now I used a very simple shape here. It was a rectangle and a circle. Right. So let's get out of here. Let's click on this little plus sign, say restore viewport. Now I'm going to click on my outline of Texas. All right, it's important that you move it over to your outline. I'm going to actually name this Texas. Right. So I currently have my outline of Texas selected, the one that I've drawn here, this spline shape. I'm going to click on modifier list and I'm going to find a modifier called Bevel Profile. All right, so now it's started. It wants to make a shape here. So what I'm going to do here is under parameters, I'm going to switch to classic, and now I'm going to come down here to pick profile. Now pick profile is where we go through and we find that other shape that we made and we click on it, and that's going to now reference our Texas is referencing our outline. So let's take this and move this over. All right. So even we can rename the rectangle, we can call it ref shape, just so that we know what it is, okay? So here it is. Here's our model, right? And you can see there's the outline clearly in the front view. We zoom, we orbit around, we can see how Bevel Profile is giving us that shape. Now, there's some things we can do here. First off, if you put too much detail into your model, it may not come out quite as clean. And I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to come in here to Vertex, and I'm going to turn on Show End Results. And if I was to take my points and move them around, right? You see how I'm getting this extreme spike happening on the inside? That's because if I turn off showing results, you'll see that my points are very, very close together, right? And so you want to avoid points that are really close, making these really extreme angles. That's going to cause you to end up with spikes like that. All right. Another thing we could do here is if we come up here and select on our profile, so I'm selecting the shape reference, let's call this, I'm going to change it, I'm going to call it profile shape. And so now I'm going to click on segment, and if I select the one segment that is not the very nice detailed curve part, but this outside part, and delete that, so two things happen. One, I'm going to turn that off. One, the model capped itself off. It put one big polygon on the top. The second thing is it did kind of shift it out a little bit. So if I undo that a step, you could see here in the top view, here's the shape. When I undo it, it takes and it moves this innermost vertex point. That is what lines up with the actual outline of our reference. Right? And so it is possible you may, once you've done that, you may want to go in here, and if you go to the profile gizmo, I went into wireframe there. You see here is this little star down there. What that represents is the basic spline outline we made of Texas. And this is showing us where that profile shape is being applied to that in order to create the actual geometry for the model. And so if we wanted this to sit further inside, we could actually move it in. And so I'm being very careful here to move it only along the x-axis. So if we look here, you can see it from above. We want to only move it on that axis. If it gets offset, like meaning if we move it kind of out here, we're going to end up with all kinds of weird out of control things because it's being drawn along the spline, and now it's not even sitting right there, so you're getting weird results. So just move that in a little bit. If we wanted to, like if we're fine with the shape being a little bit larger, like it's fine. Now this all worked out very well, right? There was very little problems that I ran into, and I'm going to explain to you just to reinforce the things I did to make sure that this was a very hassle-free project. So let's go down here, not the bottommost button, but the one above it for Zoom Extends All. So first off, in the top view, I started modeling out here. I started in positive X and started drawing around to create my shape. I made sure it was not too detailed. It didn't have too many points that were too close together. That's step one. Step two is when I created my profile shape, I created it in the front view over here in positive X. All right. So in future tutorials, you'll see there can be things that you can do that can maybe make this a project that may need a little bit more troubleshooting. Right? Because here's what happens is I have this shape out here, this profile shape, and there's any number of things that could happen. Like if I take this and I'm going to turn on my angle snap and go into rotate. For example, if I had this thing rotated 180 degrees, if I had built my model so that all the detail was over here on the negative X side, my model would be inside out, as you can see here. Right? You see how the edges are totally flat? That's because based on where it's sitting on that bevel profile, see how now everything is on the inside? There's the spline. So it is possible I could troubleshoot this by rotating where that sits here. I'm looking down, as I rotate this, I'm looking at the Z value at the bottom. So I'm making sure it's 180. And I can move this out then. And so there's ways to go through and troubleshoot when you run into problems working with Edit Spline. Let's undo both of those moves. Also, once you have this, you can go in, and once it's looking all nice and clean, you can go in and actually refine it. Like if I wanted to take this shape and actually move it in, or have it kind of be like a bevel out shape, I certainly could. Let's do this. Let's grab these two segments, and I'm going to come down here and just click on divide to add 2 extra points. Go into vertex and just drag this out. Now this is my new shape that I have. All right, so there's ways to go through and refine that. If I wanted to round out the bottom, I could grab both points and let's do a fillet on it. The fillet will stop when 2 points connect. I just like to crank this up to 500 to weld it. So you can see there. Right? So there's all sorts of ways you can go back in and refine something like this. Oh, I don't want to make changes in perspective though. That ends up causing trouble all the time. Like I could do things like adjust this. So it's always going to base it off of the bottom here. So if I take this and move it, you'll see. There we go. And maybe we'll just take this guy, lower him down. Move this one over. So there's all sorts of ways that you can sort of work with a tool like Bevel Profile. All right? There's lots of options for it. Once you have your basic shape, you can always go back and refine it. So there we go. That's the basics of working with Bevel Profile there you go.